This is probably the worst way to make freaking purity seals, but making a purity seal with a hot glue mold. Alright, so originally I was gonna just 3D print these, find them online, print them out, but since we moved, I never had a chance to calibrate my 3D printer. I haven't even set it up. I barely put it together, and on top of that, since we got our cat, she apparently likes to just sit on it. I could only imagine what kind of havoc she'd wreak on it if, like, it was running. So that, and that's kind of running out of time to experiment with all that and get it all set up and running again. So in the past, I've made hot glue molds before. Mostly every skull that you see on my chaplain is made from a hot glue mold. So what is a hot glue mold? It is easily the cheapest way to make a mold. I don't recommend it unless you are poor like me and don't want to spend, like, okay, I'm obviously joking around here, but every other method to make a mold is usually expensive in some way. Hot glue usually has some kind of bend to it, some give that gives a, I mean, it's not as rubbery as like your silicone molds for like resin molds and stuff or whatever, but if you do it right, you can pull off basic shapes. Yeah, so not only was every skull on the chaplain done, but a lot of these shapes. So on the chest, the emblems here, skull on the belt, they were all hot glue molds. Same with the emblems on the bolter and the skull on the Crozius Arcanum. Oh my god, I can't pronounce it. The Crozius Arcanum, yeah, the staff. They were all made with the hot glue mold. So like any other molding process, you start out by mocking up your actual shape. I had a small like little leftover plastic skull from like a Halloween pack, and just some scrap foam. I kind of put it all together to kind of like make the shape. In hindsight, I forgot to make the little like indentation from when you would stamp. The seals are supposed to be like wax stamps, like you'd have like on an envelope, you know. So there's going to be an indentation from the stamp itself, and then that little bleed out around the circle. I forgot about that until afterwards, so mine didn't have that. I kind of just like tried to fake it after I did the painting. So after I had my shape all made up, I just took sticks and sticks of hot glue and just covered it. This was a little tricky. I tried making a couple. I think I tried making 4 in total. Only 2 turned out okay. So hot glue is kind of flexible, but it's not that flexible. You need your layer to be thin enough to be able to pull it off of your mold, but you don't want it to be so thick that you can no longer bend it. And there's like a very fine line in between those, you know. Go one way or the other, you have problems. Either it's gonna rip or it's not gonna take anything off. So I said, like, hot glue molds, they're good for really simple stuff, but beyond that, you got to go the more expensive route, I think. I mean, but it was a method I was familiar with that I did in desperation a couple years ago, and I was like, well, I know it will at least work. It didn't have any leftover foam clay though, so I knew that Michaels carried foam clay. I'd never used it before, so I went and checked it out, and when I did go, I was kind of surprised at how much cosplay stuff they actually did have. I mean, everything from like foam sheets, foam dowels, you name it. What I found hilarious though, so Michaels has everything foam that you need, you know, in like this entire aisle. They have everything from Warbler, they have foam dowels, foam rolls, and like 3 different thicknesses, but they had no like razor blades, X-Acto knives, No contact cement. Like, who's setting this store up? I don't know. I thought, oh, okay, maybe it's in a different aisle, and I'm looking, no contact cement in the entire store. Why would you sell that much foam and not even carry contact cement? What else would you use to bind this stuff together? It's such like an oversight on a craft store to like only go half-assed on a craft. You know what I mean? Like, if you're gonna like offer the supplies for a craft, you should want to offer all the supplies so you can grab everything at once at the store. But anyway, like I said, I never used their foam clay before, so quick review, don't really like it. Maybe I didn't mess with it enough. I still have a tub full of it all. There's only two other kinds of foam clay I've used in the past. My first experience was the one that I originally fell in love with, which was the one that I used for everything else that you see behind me and on the chaplain. That was all from TNT Cosplay. I love their foam clay. It is amazing. It's just like any other foam clay. It's water based, so it's gonna take a couple days to dry, but their stuff dries thoroughly the whole way through. Like, these giant freaking skulls on the staff over here dried thoroughly the whole way through. I don't know how it does it, but it did the whole thing. Model Magic will not dry once it surface dries, and its surface cracks like crazy, so everything just splits and you're still wet on the inside, and it stays that way for weeks. Like, I've used it in the past once. I ran out of foam clay and I was in a rush, so on the Terminator Chaplain, the giant skull that's on the leg was made with Model Magic, and that leg is so heavy. I would love to just tear the whole thing off and redo the thing with other foam clay. Like, I did it like 2 or 3 weeks before the convention back in 2019, and it was still smushy. So what I ended up doing was I cut the entire inside of the back of the boot out, or the leg piece, ripped all the foam out so that the foam clay would start drying from the other side, and it still was not dry. So I started digging it all out, so it's actually insanely hollow, still heavy as hell, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's still freaking not dry the whole way. Like, it just took so long. Michael's foam clay, I don't know the brand, but I want to consider it almost like a mid-tier. It has bits and elements of both, so it doesn't crack like Model Magic. It has good surface drying like TNT's foam clay, but it stays wet like Model Magic. Like, these purity seals, they're only like this thick, like maybe a half an inch thick. I let them dry for like 3 days over a weekend. They were still smushy, and I'm like, something this small should not take this long to dry. So what I ended up doing was I cut the back out and I just squeezed out as much as possible. It's like, they need to be thinner anyway, so, and I pulled all that out, and they were still squishy. I think they're okay now, but it just took so much longer than usual for some reason. I'll have to keep experimenting with it, you know. So, full disclaimer, I'm not saying it's their clay is garbage. It's just first impressions weren't the best. I'll try and find a reason to use the rest of the tub and see how it all turns out. Yeah, so from this point on, I already had I made 4 molds, 2 failed, so I had 2 left. Yeah, so the end result of your hot glue mold will look something like this. Definitely can't pick it up in light because there's not really any color to it, but yeah, it's just like any other mold. It's got a little bit of flex, but not a lot. This isn't gonna last you a lot of molds, but I think when I did my other stuff, I was able to pop out a good handful before they ended up just cracking. It's not that flexible, but enough to get the job done. So your foam clay is water based, so it needs to air dry, but it's also gonna stick to your mold once you put it in there. So the only way to actually get your mold in there, and you don't want to air dry it inside the mold too, because again, foam clay starts drying by surface drying. So what would happen is if you left it in here, only this side here would dry. The usual technique with foam clay is you'll stuff this full of foam clay, throw it in your freezer for a couple hours, take it out, pop your mold out, take that, set it aside, and then just let it air dry that way. These were still a little bit of a pain to get everything out of. I ended up using like a clay tool to kind of jam it all out. I repeated this process a couple more times because I knew not everyone was either going to be a good turnout or something. So I just made a bunch of them. While in between, I was making the scrolls themselves. I used some leftover muslin fabric that I used for the giant tabard on my chaplain. Cut them all out. I think they were like 2 or 3 inches wide. And I just made them long enough that I could just start writing and then just crop them however I needed. As for what I wrote on them, again, I ran into another issue where I didn't know what to write. Usually if you do any Googling, most people will tell you what's written on like their miniatures and on their statues and stuff, not so much what's actually written on them. I did find some information. Usually they're like either quotes or some I guess it actually depends on like the generation as well. Like I think it's different in 30k and farther back because they had different meanings. I don't know if it's like just because like as the generations go within Warhammer, from like Warhammer 30k, 40k, obviously like things change within the culture and stuff. But I do remember, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there was a different, like a change in what's actually written on them. So I figured I'll hop onto the Warhammer wiki page and I'll just find quotes. And I saved a bunch of them, made sure I organized them on factions and stuff. So I have an entire thing on the Adeptus Sororita, an entire one just on the Imperium, since it's all the same. I mean, the Adeptus Sororita is within the Imperium, but yeah, the Imperium's, yeah. So I kept them separate. That way, underneath each one, I could put their appropriate logos and stuff. So if you have like the Sororita logos underneath, it was a Sororita quote. If you have an Imperium logo underneath, it was an Imperium-based quote. But they're all about, I can't remember exactly word for word, which I'm not going to pull them all out and read them. Because, I mean, if you go through the wikis, you can find all the, if you see the quotes, most likely it's on one of these. I figure since these were smaller than what I used on my chaplain, I wasn't going to go crazy with trying to make it look all like calligraphy or something like that, but it was still legible. So I tried to write small, make everything consistent, but also kind of fancy. Afterward, I kind of stained and roughed up the edges. So the staining process for the fabric, I started with laid down some paper towels and stuff, and then just started soaking the edges in coffee to kind of coffee stain it. And then I did it again and again with a couple more passes just to really darken it up. And then while it was saturated in coffee for the coffee stains, I took some brown paint, really watered that down, and then hit the edges again, both front and back, to really kind of like really make it stained up. Gave that a few passes. No real uniform pattern. I just kind of went with what felt kind of cool to go where. Then with each pass of the brown paint, I kind of like went less and less watered down to eventually I was almost using straight brown paint more on the back to kind of like, I don't know. But the saturation from the coffee and the watered down paint, it would kind of like saturate that a little bit to kind of like bleed it out a little. So it wasn't like just putting on like raw paint, but it just made it thicker in spots as I went. They all turned out pretty good. I do like how they turned out. I think I gave it like a weekend to let the seals dry. Like I mentioned, the foam clay wasn't completely dry in the center, so I ended up kind of cutting it out and squeezing everything out some. which helped because I wanted them to be a little thinner. I just gave them like a basic red paint, you know, did it in layers, and like you would do any kind of like model work where you start dark, and as you get to your higher and higher surfaces, you go lighter. And since I forgot to do the little stamp indentation, I kind of faked there being an indentation with my paint. Then I kind of just hot glued the scrolls to the back of the seal, you know. But yeah, when I kind of like squeezed all that foam out, I kind of created like a reverse indentation in the back of the seal. So I had to bring that back out. So I cut up like really small sections of like my foam dowels, and I kind of like put that in the back. But I still needed a way to attach them to the armor, and I didn't want to just glue them right on because I knew they would come off. So I started looking around my my back room, because the amount of garbage I have back there, I have no idea. But I found these neat little fasteners. So what I did was I kind of ran these through the little dowels in the back that I had glued to the back of the purity seal, and then I ran these through the armor piece, and I just kind of, you know, and then I made sure I hot glued the back of them. That way I knew that they were secure for sure. Not sure what I exactly got these for originally, but glad I have them, because I have a lot of them. Actually, for all I know, they probably were, the purity seals probably were the reason I bought them in the first place. Because I think I was going to put some on the chaplain and on this when I first made these suits. It's kind of one of those things that you do when you make all this stuff anyway. You have all these plans and you get close to the deadlines and you just don't get things done, so you gotta compromise. But I mean, you can always go back afterwards and touch them up for the next year, which is what I do every year. But yeah, I think they turned out pretty good. Yeah, like always, I don't know how to end a video, so purity seals, yay.